The wind, a mournful sigh across the unforgiving canvas of the plains, whipped at Elias Thorne's weathered face, stinging his eyes not with its chill, but with the grit of despair it seemed to carry from some forgotten corner of the world. He'd seen his share of hardship. This land was a cruel mistress, but what lay huddled beneath the skeletal branches of a dying mesquite tree, a small, pitiful bundle against the vast, indifferent landscape, struck a chord of sorrow so profound it nearly buckled his knees. It was a child, no more than a whisper of a girl, her frame so slight it seemed the next gust might carry her away like a stray leaf. Her clothes were rags, her skin pale and smudged with dirt and tears, her matted hair the color of dried corn silk. He dismounted, his movements slow, deliberate, as if approaching a startled fawn. The air thrummed with an unspoken tragedy, a question hanging heavy: who could commit such an act of cruelty, abandoning a soul so young to the mercies of a world that often showed none? This moment, Elias knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, was a precipice. The path of his life, solitary and etched with the quiet grief of a widower, was about to change, irrevocably. He knelt, his shadow falling over the child, and for a moment, he saw not a stranger, but a reflection of all the innocence lost, all the chances stolen. Her eyes, when they fluttered open, were huge and dark, pools of ancient fear in a face too young for such sorrow. He saw no fight in them, only a weary resignation that tore at his heart. He'd built his ranch, the Bar M, into a testament of hard work and resilience, a sanctuary against the harshness of the frontier, but it had always felt hollow, a grand, empty stage waiting for a play that never began. Now, looking at this forsaken child, he understood. His strength, his prosperity, it was all meaningless if not used to shield the vulnerable. This was not a choice, but a duty, a calling from a part of himself he thought had died with his beloved Sarah. He reached out a calloused hand, palm up, a silent offering of peace, of sanctuary. The little girl flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, but she didn't pull away entirely. Her breath hitched, a fragile sound, like the flutter of a trapped bird's wings. The sun beat down, a relentless hammer, but here, in the meager shade of the mesquite, a different kind of heat was building, the first spark of a connection, a promise unspoken. Elias Thorne, a man who had thought his heart turned to stone, felt the first thaw. He would not leave her. He could not. This was more than finding an abandoned child, this was finding a reason. The emptiness that had been his constant companion for years suddenly had a name, and its name was hope, fragile and trembling, but undeniably present in the form of this lost little girl. He spoke softly, his voice raspy from disuse in such gentle tones, "You're safe now, little one. I won't let anything hurt you." He didn't know if she understood the words, but he hoped she felt the truth in them, a truth as solid and unyielding as the mountains that framed the distant horizon. He was Elias Thorne, and this was his vow. The story of their lives, entwined by fate on this desolate patch of earth, was only just beginning. The wind still howled, but now, it seemed to carry not just sorrow, but the faintest whisper of a lullaby. Gently, as if handling the most delicate porcelain, Elias scooped the child into his arms. She was lighter than a sack of feed, her small body limp with exhaustion and fear, yet in that moment, she felt heavier than all the burdens he had ever carried, for this was the weight of a life, a future, entrusted to him. He cradled her against his chest, her small head lolling against his shoulder, and for an instant, the sharp, painful memory of holding his own infant son, lost too soon, pierced through him. But this was different. This was not about what was lost, but what could be found, what could be nurtured back to life. He mounted his sturdy gelding, Shadow, with an ease born of long practice, settling the child securely in front of him. She didn't stir, her breathing shallow but steady. He turned Shadow towards home, towards the Bar M, a beacon of order and quiet prosperity in the wild expanse. The journey back was made in a strange, reverent silence, broken only by the rhythmic creak of saddle leather and the soft thud of hooves on the dry earth. Elias found himself looking down at the small, still face nestled against him, her eyelashes dark crescents on her pale cheeks. A fierce protectiveness surged through him, an emotion so potent it surprised him. He, who had guarded his heart so fiercely after Sarah's passing, felt its walls beginning to crumble, not with a crash, but with the gentle insistence of a spring thaw. As the familiar lines of his ranch house came into view, the sturdy timber, the welcoming porch, the curl of smoke from the chimney promising warmth and sustenance, a sense of rightness settled over him. This child belonged here, not in the desolation where he'd found her. Martha, his housekeeper, a woman whose pragmatic kindness had been a quiet anchor in his solitary life, was on the porch, her hands covered in flour, a furrow of concern on her brow as she watched him approach at an uncharacteristically slow pace. Her eyes widened as she saw the bundle in his arms, and then, her expression softened from alarm to a deep, maternal understanding. She was a woman of few words but immense heart, and Elias knew he could count on her. He dismounted carefully, holding the girl close. "Found her out by Weaver's Creek, Martha," he said, his voice low. "Abandoned." Barely alive, Martha wiped her hands on her apron, her gaze fixed on the child. "The poor lamb," she breathed, her voice thick with a compassion that mirrored his own. "Bring her in, Elias." Quickly now, inside, the warmth of the kitchen enveloped them, the scent of baking bread a comforting balm. Martha, with an efficiency that belied her gentle nature, began to prepare a warm bath and soft linens. She clucked over the child, her movements deft and reassuring. "Just a slip of a thing. Starved, I reckon, and scared out of her wits." Lily, for that was the name that seemed to whisper itself into Elias's mind, though he knew not why, remained silent, her eyes wide and watchful, following Martha's every move. She was like a wild creature, wary and untrusting, but there was no fight in her, only a profound weariness. When Martha gently tried to undress her for the bath, Lily flinched violently, a small, choked cry escaping her lips. Elias, standing by the doorway, felt a fresh wave of anger towards whoever had inflicted such terror upon her. Martha paused, her touch softening further. "There now, sweet pea," she cooed. "Just want to get you clean and warm. No one's going to hurt you here." It took time, infinite patience, but slowly, Lily allowed Martha to tend to her. The grime of the wilderness washed away to reveal skin bruised in places, marked by a harshness no child should ever know. Once clean and dressed in a soft, oversized nightshirt that had once belonged to a child Martha had cared for long ago, she looked even more fragile, lost in the fabric. Martha settled her in a small cot they quickly made up near the hearth, the warmest spot in the house. She tried to offer a little broth, but Lily turned her head away, her eyes closing as if the effort of existing was too much. Elias watched, his heart aching. This was just the beginning. Healing would be a long road, paved with patience and a love she had yet to learn to accept. He pulled up a chair beside the cot, content to simply be near, a silent guardian in the quiet of the evening. Martha placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "She's safe now, Elias. That's the most important thing. Give her time," he nodded, his gaze never leaving the small, still form. The ranch, his sanctuary, had a new purpose. It was no longer just a place of work and memory, but a haven for a broken little bird, a place where, perhaps, she could learn to mend her wings and, one day, trust enough to fly again. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and in the quiet rhythm of the sleeping child's breath, Elias Thorne found a fragile peace he hadn't known in years. Days bled into weeks, each one a delicate dance of advance and retreat in the fragile world of the child they had come to call Lily, a name that seemed to fit her quiet, pale beauty. She remained mostly silent, her voice a forgotten instrument. Her communication was in the language of fear, a sudden flinch at a raised hand, a shrinking away from unexpected sounds, eyes that darted to the door whenever a stranger approached the ranch. Elias and Martha moved around her with a gentleness that was almost reverent, their voices kept low, their movements predictable. The Bar M, usually a place of robust activity, seemed to hold its breath, a collective effort to nurture this bruised seedling of a girl. Lily would spend hours sitting by the window, clutching a small, crudely carved wooden bird Elias had found in her rags and cleaned for her, her gaze lost on the distant horizon as if searching for something, or perhaps, someone. There were no tears, just a profound, unnerving stillness. Martha, with her bottomless well of maternal instinct, would try to engage her with small tasks, shelling peas, folding napkins, simple, repetitive actions that required little interaction but offered a sense of inclusion. Sometimes, Lily's small hands would mimic Martha's, her brow furrowed in concentration, and in those moments, a flicker of something other than fear would ghost across her features. Elias found his routine subtly shifting. He'd take his morning coffee on the porch, near where Lily often sat, not speaking to her directly unless she looked his way, but simply sharing the space. He'd tell her about the horses, the way the seasons changed the land, the names of the wildflowers that bloomed in the meadow, his voice a low, steady rumble, a constant presence. He never pushed for answers, never asked about the horrors that had led her to that desolate spot by the creek. He knew that trust, like a wild mustang, could not be broken and tamed, only coaxed and earned with patience and respect. One evening, as a storm raged outside, mirroring the unspoken turmoil within their small cottage, Lily was jolted awake by a particularly violent clap of thunder. A raw, terrified scream tore from her throat, a sound so primal it chilled Elias and Martha to the bone. Before either could react, she had scrambled from her cot and hidden herself under the kitchen table, trembling uncontrollably, her small hands pressed over her ears. Elias slowly approached, kneeling down. He didn't try to pull her out. He simply sat near the table, speaking softly. "It's just the thunder, Lily. It can't hurt you in here. You're safe." He stayed there, talking about inconsequential things, the sound of his voice a counter-rhythm to the storm's fury, until, gradually, her trembling subsided. She didn't emerge, but a small, dirt-smudged hand crept out from under the tablecloth, resting on the floor near his boot. It was the smallest of gestures, yet it felt monumental. Elias felt a lump form in his throat. This tiny, unconscious reach for connection, for reassurance, was the first fragile thread of trust. He noticed a thin, tarnished silver chain around her neck, mostly hidden by her nightshirt. He'd seen it when Martha bathed her, but hadn't given it much thought. Now, in the flickering lamplight, he saw a small, heart-shaped locket attached. It was dented and worn, clearly old. He wondered what secrets it held, what memories were locked within its tarnished casing. He made quiet inquiries in the nearby town of Redemption, a dusty settlement that lived up to its name for some, and fell far short for others. He described Lily, vaguely, to the sheriff, a weary man named Jebediah Stone, and to a few trusted shopkeepers. No one knew of a missing child matching her description. There were whispers of wagon trains that had passed through, some losing members to sickness or hardship, whispers of less savory characters who drifted through the territory, preying on the vulnerable. But nothing concrete, nothing that pointed to Lily's origins, only a deepening sense of unease that her past was shadowed by something dark and deliberate. The locket became a silent symbol of that unknown past, a mystery clutched close to a heart that was slowly, painstakingly, beginning to feel the first stirrings of safety. Elias knew, with a growing certainty, that the peace they were building was fragile, that the shadows of Lily's past might one day stretch long enough to reach their sanctuary. But for now, he focused on the small victories, the slight lessening of fear in her eyes, the tentative touch of a hand, the enduring hope that love and patience could heal even the deepest wounds. Spring had breathed new life into the rugged land, painting the pastures of the Bar M in vibrant greens and dotting them with the cheerful faces of wildflowers. And with the changing season, a subtle shift had begun in Lily. The profound silence that had enveloped her like a shroud was beginning to fray at the edges. It started with small sounds, a soft hum as she watched Martha knead dough, a tiny gasp of delight when a playful colt nuzzled her hand through the fence. These were treasures, each one carefully noted and cherished by Elias and Martha. Elias had taken to bringing Lily with him on some of his shorter rides around the ranch. He'd fashioned a small, secure seat for her in front of his saddle, and she would sit, small and straight, her eyes, once wide with fear, now often wide with a quiet wonder. She never spoke, but he felt her small body relax against him as they rode, her hand sometimes unconsciously gripping his forearm when they navigated a patch of rough terrain. He pointed out jackrabbits darting through the sagebrush, hawks circling lazily overhead, the way the light caught the distant peaks of the Crimson Mountains, turning them to fire at sunset. He was sharing his world with her, not just the land, but the love he felt for it, a love that was steady and enduring. One afternoon, they were by the creek, not far from where he'd found her, though he never mentioned that day. He was checking a fence line, and Lily was sitting on a smooth, sun-warmed rock, trailing her fingers in the cool water. A bright blue butterfly, its wings like stained glass, fluttered past, landing briefly on a nearby Indian paintbrush. Lily's gaze followed it, and then, a sound, soft as the whisper of the butterfly's wings, emerged. "Pretty," she breathed. Elias froze, his hand still on the fence wire. He turned slowly, his heart thudding. Had he imagined it? Lily was looking at him, a tentative, almost questioning look in her eyes, as if surprised by the sound of her own voice. He smiled, a slow, gentle smile that reached his eyes. "Yes, Lily," he said, his voice calm, though his soul was singing. It is very pretty. That single word was a key, unlocking a door that had been bolted shut for far too long. It wasn't a torrent, not yet, but the words began to come, hesitant and few at first, then with a slowly growing confidence. She started naming things, horse, flower, Martha, and then, one evening, as he tucked the blanket around her, Elias, hearing his name on her lips, spoken with such innocent simplicity, was a profound moment. It wasn't pa or father, but it was a connection, an acknowledgement. It was enough. His loneliness, a constant companion for so many years, had begun to recede, replaced by a warmth that spread through him like the summer sun. He found himself looking forward to each day with an anticipation he hadn't felt since Sarah was alive. Lily was his purpose, his small, resilient flower blooming in the once barren soil of his heart. Martha, too, blossomed in Lily's presence. Her quiet smiles were more frequent, her humming more cheerful as she went about her chores. She taught Lily simple songs, her gentle voice blending with Lily's increasingly confident one. The kitchen, once just a place of work, became a haven of shared moments, of whispered stories and soft laughter. The theme of family, not of blood but of choice, began to weave itself into their conversations. "She's like a daughter to you, Elias," Martha said one evening, watching him mend one of Lily's worn shoes by the firelight. Elias looked at the small shoe in his large, calloused hands. "She is more than that, Martha," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. She's hope." But even as this fragile hope blossomed, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that their newfound peace was built on borrowed time. The mystery of Lily's past, of the locket she never took off, still hung in the air. He knew, with a grim certainty, that some shadows are relentless, and that true sanctuary often had to be fought for, not just found. For now, though, he pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the miracle of Lily's unfolding, on the joy of her tentative laughter, on the fragile, precious hope she represented. Each day was a gift, and he would treasure it. The sun-drenched days of summer deepened into the golden hues of early autumn, a season of harvest and quiet contentment on the Bar. Lily was thriving, her laughter now a frequent melody in the ranch house, her steps light and confident as she explored her world. She had become Elias's little shadow, accompanying him on his rounds, her small hand often tucked securely in his. The fear that had once haunted her eyes had largely receded, replaced by an inquisitive sparkle. Yet, Elias knew that the roots of trauma ran deep, and true peace was a delicate bloom. One afternoon, while in redemption for supplies, Elias noticed a man he didn't recognize. This wasn't unusual in a town that served as a waypoint for many, but something about this particular stranger, lean and ferret-faced with eyes that seemed to absorb everything and reflect nothing, set Elias on edge. The man was lingering near the general store, not buying anything, just watching, his gaze sharp and calculating. Elias felt a prickle of unease, a premonition as cold as a winter wind. He completed his business quickly, a sense of urgency pressing upon him. As he loaded his wagon, he saw the stranger speaking to Jedediah Stone, the sheriff. The sheriff listened, then shook his head, gesturing vaguely towards the north. The stranger nodded curtly and then, his eyes swept the street, lingering for a heartbeat on Elias before he melted into the midday crowd. Elias's hand instinctively went to the Colt peacemaker holstered at his hip. He told himself he was being overly cautious, that the frontier was full of drifters. But the image of those cold, assessing eyes stayed with him, a knot of apprehension tightening in his gut. A few days later, Martha had taken Lily to gather late-season berries in the woods near the creek. Elias was mending tack in the barn when he heard a sound that wasn't part of the usual ranch symphony, a sharp, terrified cry, unmistakably Lily's. His blood ran cold. He dropped the leather reins and sprinted from the barn, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. He burst into the clearing by the creek to see Lily, pale as a ghost, pointing a trembling finger towards a thicket of willows. Martha was beside her, trying to comfort her, her own face etched with alarm. "What is it? What happened?" Elias demanded, his gaze sweeping the dense undergrowth. "A man, Elias," Martha said, her voice strained. "Hidden in the trees. He had a snake, a dead one, dangling it. When Lily saw him, he just smiled. A cruel smile. Then he slipped away before I could get a good look." Lily was shaking, tears streaming down her face, clinging to Martha. "Bad man," she choked out, the words laced with a terror Elias hadn't seen in months. He looked like. She couldn't finish, dissolving into sobs. Elias felt a cold fury rise within him. This wasn't a random drifter. This was a deliberate act of intimidation, a message. The stranger from town. It had to be. He knelt, pulling Lily into his arms, trying to soothe her, but his mind was racing. Whoever this man was, he knew about Lily. And he was close. That night, Lily's nightmares returned with a vengeance, her cries echoing through the small house. She thrashed in her cot, muttering broken phrases, "No, go away, dark place, bad man." Elias and Martha took turns sitting with her, their hearts aching at her distress. In a moment of troubled sleep, she clutched at her locket, her fingers fumbling with the clasp. It sprang open, and Elias, leaning close to wipe her brow, caught a glimpse of what lay inside. It wasn't a portrait, as he might have expected. Instead, nestled against the worn velvet, was a tiny, intricately folded piece of paper. Before he could see more, Lily's eyes snapped open, wide and terrified, and she quickly closed the locket, her hand protectively covering it. But he had seen enough to know it held a clue, a secret she was desperate to protect. The shadow was no longer just a premonition. It had a face, a cruel smile, and it was drawing nearer. Elias knew, with grim certainty, that a confrontation was inevitable. The piece of the bar M had been shattered, and he would have to fight to restore it, to protect the little girl who had become the center of his world. He began to make preparations, his mind clear and resolved. He checked his rifle, his shotgun, ensured his ranch hands, loyal men all, were aware of a potential threat, though he kept the details sparse. The bar M was his fortress, and Lily was its most precious treasure. He would not let the darkness take her. The air on the bar M grew thick with unspoken tension, the crisp autumn days failing to dispel the chill of impending confrontation. Elias moved with a quiet intensity, his senses heightened, every rustle of leaves, every distant bark of a coyote, a potential herald of the approaching storm. Lily, sensing the shift in him, became more subdued, her laughter less frequent, her small hand often seeking the reassurance of his. She rarely strayed far from the house or from Martha's comforting presence. The locket remained her constant companion, clutched tightly whenever a sudden noise startled her. Elias had tried, gently, to ask her about it, about the folded paper inside, but she would only shake her head, her eyes pleading for him to understand her silence. He didn't press. He knew that when the time was right, or when the danger became too immediate to ignore, its secrets would be revealed. The waiting was the hardest part. Days turned into a week, then two, and the initial vigilance began to fray, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. Was the man gone? Had Elias overreacted? But then, a rider was spotted at dusk, silhouetted against the fiery sunset, observing the ranch from a distant rise before melting back into the gathering gloom. It was a stark reminder, they were being watched. The following morning, as the mist still clung to the low-lying pastures, the men arrived. He didn't sneak or skulk, he rode bold as brass up the main track to the ranch house, as if he owned the place. He was the ferret-faced man Elias had seen in Redemption, but now he was accompanied by two other riders, equally hard-looking, their eyes cold and calculating. Elias had been expecting him. He was on the porch, rifle leaning against the rail, a mug of coffee growing cold in his hand. Martha had taken Lily to the root cellar at the first sign of riders, a prearranged plan. "That's far enough," Elias called out, his voice calm but carrying the unmistakable ring of authority. The lead rider, the ferret-faced man, pulled his horse to a halt a respectful distance away, though his smirk was anything but respectful. "Name's Silas Blackwood," he announced, his voice thin and reedy, yet laced with an oily confidence. "I'm here for what's mine." Elias's eyes narrowed. "I don't recall owning anything that belongs to you, Blackwood." Blackwood's smirk widened. "Oh, I think you do. A little stray girl by the name of Lily. Or maybe you call her something else now. Doesn't matter. She belongs to me." The words struck Elias like a physical blow, a cold confirmation of his worst fears. So, this was the source of Lily's trauma, the bad man from her nightmares. "Lily is a child, not a piece of property," Elias stated, his voice dangerously low. "She belongs with those who care for her, who keep her safe." Blackwood chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. "Safe? She was safe with me. Had a roof, food. Ungrateful little whelp ran off first chance she got. I have papers, signed and sealed. She's indentured to me. Legally mine." He patted a worn leather satchel at his side. Elias felt a surge of revulsion. Indentured. A pretty word for slavery. He thought of Lily's flinches, her nightmares, the terror in her eyes. "Your papers mean nothing to me," Elias said, his grip tightening on the porch rail. "What matters is the fear you put in that child. No decent man would treat a child so. Blackwood's eyes hardened, the pretense of civility dropping away. I ain't here to debate decency with you, rancher. I'm here for the girl. Hand her over, and we'll be on our way. No trouble. One of his companions shifted in his saddle, his hand drifting casually towards his holster. The threat was palpable, hanging heavy in the morning air. Elias straightened, his own hand moving almost imperceptibly closer to the rifle. That's not going to happen, Blackwood. Lily stays here. This is her home now. Brave words, old man, Blackwood sneered. But foolish. There's 3 of us. Just one of you. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The moment stretched, taut and brittle. The chirping of crickets in the nearby grass sounded unnaturally loud. Elias knew this was more than just a standoff over a child, it was a battle for her very soul, a stand against the kind of casual cruelty that blighted the lives of the innocent. He thought of Lily, hidden in the dark, probably terrified. He would not fail her. You'll leave my land, Blackwood, Elias said, his voice like flint. Now. And you'll never come back. Blackwood's face contorted in a snarl. Then we'll take her, he nodded to his men. The quiet morning was about to erupt. The fragile peace of the bar shattered as Blackwood's men spurred their horses forward, their intentions stark and brutal. Elias was ready. In one fluid motion, he brought the rifle to his shoulder, its cold stock a familiar reassurance. He didn't aim to kill, not yet, but to warn, to drive them back. His first shot cracked through the morning air, kicking up dust just in front of the lead horse's hooves. The animal reared, screaming, nearly unseating its rider. The second man, quicker, was already drawing his pistol. Elias fired again, the bullet thudding into the wooden fence post beside the man's head, sending splinters flying. I said, leave. Elias roared, his voice a command that brooked no argument. For a moment, the 2 riders hesitated, their bravado faltering in the face of such determined resistance. But Blackwood, his face a mask of fury, urged them on. He's bluffing. Get the girl. He himself, however, stayed further back, a coward at heart, content to let others do his dirty work. One of the men, regaining his nerve, charged towards the porch, pistol blazing. Elias felt a searing pain in his left arm as a bullet grazed him, but he ignored it, his focus absolute. He fired, and the men cried out, clutching his shoulder as he tumbled from his horse. The second henchman, seeing his companion fall, veered towards the side of the house, clearly intending to circle around to where he imagined Lily might be hidden. Elias knew he couldn't cover both directions at once. Just as despair threatened to creep in, a new sound joined the fray, the unmistakable boom of a shotgun. From the corner of the barn, Miguel, Elias's loyal foreman, stepped out, shotgun leveled. This is private property, amigos. Miguel shouted, his voice steady. He fired a blast over the remaining rider's head, who, thoroughly unnerved, wheeled his horse and galloped back towards Blackwood, leaving his injured compatriot groaning on the ground. Blackwood, seeing his plan unraveling, his men either down or deserting, was now alone and exposed. His ferret face was contorted with rage and a dawning fear. He looked from Elias on the porch to Miguel by the barn, then to his fallen men. He was outmaneuvered, outgunned. Suddenly, a small figure darted from the direction of the root cellar. It was Lily. Her face was pale, streaked with dirt and tears, but her eyes blazed with a desperate courage. In her hand, she clutched her locket, holding it out towards Blackwood. No, she cried, her voice surprisingly strong, piercing through the lingering echo of gunfire. You won't take me. This paper. It says my mother, she wanted me to be free. Blackwood stared, momentarily stunned by her appearance, by her defiance. Lily fumbled with the locket, her small fingers shaking, and pulled out the tiny, folded paper. Martha helped me read it, she declared, her voice trembling but resolute. My mother, she paid for my passage, away from you. You stole the money. You lied. The revelation hung in the air, raw and shocking. Blackwood's face went from rage to a sickly green. So this was the truth. Lily wasn't just an indentured servant, she was a victim of theft and deception, her mother's dying wish perverted by this vile man's greed. Elias felt a surge of cold, righteous anger. He leveled his rifle squarely at Blackwood's chest. You heard the girl, Blackwood. You're a liar and a thief. And you threatened a child on my land. Get off my property before I forget what mercy is. Blackwood, his bluster completely gone, seemed to shrink in his saddle. He glanced at the fallen men, then at Elias's unyielding stance, and finally at Lily, whose small, fierce gaze seemed to burn into him. He knew he was beaten. Without a word, he yanked his horse's reins, turning it so sharply the animal stumbled. He kicked it into a desperate gallop, fleeing the ranch as if the devil himself were at his heels, not even sparing a glance for his injured men. Miguel quickly disarmed the henchman on the ground, whose fight was entirely gone. Elias lowered his rifle, his arm throbbing, but his heart swelling with a fierce pride for Lily. She had faced her tormentor, armed not with a weapon but with the truth, and her courage had been their most powerful defense. Martha rushed out, gathering Lily into a tight embrace. "Oh, my brave girl. My brave, brave girl." Elias walked slowly towards them, the adrenaline ebbing, leaving him weary but profoundly relieved. Lily looked up at him, her eyes shining. The terror was gone, replaced by a look of fierce, triumphant love. In that moment, the bond between them, forged in shared fear and quiet hope, was tempered in the fire of confrontation, emerging unbreakable, stronger than steel. The fight for family had been won, not just by strength of arms, but by the courage of a little girl who had found her voice, and her truth. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation was a blur of activity and emotion. Miguel and another ranch hand tended to the injured henchman, ensuring his wound was bound before tying him securely to his horse. Sheriff Stone would be notified, and justice, however slow, would take its course with him. Elias, his own arm bandaged by Martha's capable hands, felt a profound weariness settle over him, yet beneath it, a deep and abiding sense of peace. The shadow that had loomed over them for so long had finally been banished, not just by force, but by the light of truth that Lily had so bravely revealed. Lily herself, once the initial rush of courage subsided, clung to Martha, her small body trembling with reaction. But there was a new quality to her demeanor. The haunted look was gone, replaced by a quiet strength, a resilience that shone from within. She had faced her demon and, in doing so, had reclaimed a part of herself that Blackwood had tried to steal. Later that day, after the sheriff had come and gone, taking the sullen henchman into custody and issuing a warrant for the fugitive Blackwood, a fragile quiet settled over the bar. Elias sat on the porch, Lily nestled beside him on the old wooden swing, her small hand resting trustingly in his. Martha brought them cool lemonade, her smile gentle and full of unspoken pride. "That paper in your locket, Lily," Elias said softly, "it was from your mother." Lily nodded, her eyes fixed on the horizon where Blackwood had disappeared. She was very sick. Before she went to sleep forever, she gave me the locket. She said the paper was important. It was for a good man in a town called Freedom's Hope, who was supposed to take care of me. She paid him all the money she had, her voice trembled. But Mr. Blackwood, he was on the same wagon train. He said he knew the men. He took the paper, and the money, and me. He said my mother sold me to him. Elias's heart ached for the betrayal and cruelty this child had endured. "Your mother loved you very much, Lily," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She wanted you to be safe and free. Blackwood lied to you. He's a wicked man." Lily looked up at him, her eyes clear and trusting. "I know now," she whispered. "Martha helped me read the words good. Mama wanted me to have a new family." A tear escaped and traced a path down her dusty cheek. Elias gently wiped it away. "Well," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "I reckon your mama's wish has come true, in a way. Maybe not in Freedom's Hope, but right here." On the bar. Lily's eyes widened, a radiant hope dawning in them. "You mean?" "I mean," Elias continued, his gaze meeting hers, "that this is your home now, Lily. For as long as you want it to be. And Martha and I, well, we'd be mighty honored to be your family." For a long moment, Lily just stared at him, her lower lip trembling. Then, with a small cry that was a mixture of joy and relief, she launched herself into his arms, clinging to him tightly. "Oh, Elias," she sobbed, burying her face in his chest. "Yes. Yes." He held her close, his own eyes suspiciously moist. Martha, watching from the doorway, wiped her own eyes with the corner of her apron. The word Elias was good, but something else was forming on Lily's lips, something she had perhaps longed to say. Finally, muffled against his shirt, came the word he had never expected to hear again, a word that filled the empty chambers of his heart to overflowing. "Pa," she whispered, the sound so soft he almost missed it. Then, a little louder, with more conviction, "Pa." Elias's arms tightened around her. "Yes, Lilybug," he murmured, his voice choked. Yes, the simple word, spoken with such heartfelt sincerity, sealed their bond. It was a declaration, an acceptance, a promise. The legalities would follow, of course. Elias would make sure of it. He would formally adopt Lily, giving her his name, his protection, his legacy. But in their hearts, the adoption was already complete. They were father and daughter, bound not by blood, but by a love that had weathered storms and faced down darkness. The Bar M, once a monument to his solitude, now echoed with the promise of a future filled with laughter, love, and the quiet joys of a family forged in courage and hope. The sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, a gentle benediction on the peaceful ranch. The unbreakable bond was forged, not in a smithy's fire, but in the crucible of shared experience, and it was more precious than any earthly treasure. Years melted away like snow in the spring sun, each season bringing its own rhythm of life and growth to the Bar M. Lily blossomed under the steady, loving care of Elias and Martha, the shadows of her past receding into distant memory, replaced by the sunlit reality of her new life. She grew tall and strong, her laughter echoing through the ranch house and across the open pastures, a constant reminder of the joy she had brought into their lives. Elias, with Lily by his side, found a renewed vigor. The ranch prospered, not just in cattle and crops, but in happiness. He taught Lily to ride like the wind, to understand the language of the land, to treat every living creature with kindness and respect. He shared his wisdom, his stories, and his quiet strength, and in return, she gave him a reason to look forward to each sunrise. Martha, her silver hair now a crown of wisdom, remained the warm heart of their home, her kitchen a haven of comforting sense and gentle counsel. She taught Lily the domestic arts, but more importantly, she taught her the art of compassion, of resilience, of finding joy in simple things. The three of them became an inseparable unit, a true family woven together by threads of love, loyalty, and shared experience. The formalities of Lily's adoption had been completed years ago, and she proudly bore the Thorne name. Lily Thorne. It had a good, strong ring to it. She excelled in her studies with the circuit teacher who visited the valley, her mind quick and eager, but her greatest love was the ranch itself. She understood its rhythms, its demands, its rewards. She was as comfortable mending a fence with Elias as she was baking bread with Martha. As she entered young womanhood, her beauty was remarked upon by many, but it was her spirit, kind, intelligent, and fiercely loyal, that truly shone. Young men from neighboring ranches and the town of Redemption came calling, but Lily was in no hurry. Her heart belonged to the Bar M, to the two people who had given her a life she never dreamed possible. Elias watched her growth with a father's pride and a touch of melancholy, knowing that one day she might choose a different path. But he also knew that the roots she had put down at the Bar M were deep and strong. Whatever her future held, this would always be her home. The locket, her mother's last gift, still lay in her jewelry box, a reminder not of pain, but of a mother's love and the winding path that had led her to happiness. The folded paper was carefully preserved, a testament to a past overcome. Blackwood was never seen again, a dark footnote in their story, his power broken by a child's courage and a good man's unwavering resolve. The themes of healing and the power of chosen family were lived out daily on the Bar M. It was a sanctuary, not just for them, but for anyone who needed a helping hand. Elias and Lily, following Martha's quiet example, were known for their generosity and fairness. Their bond, forged in a moment of desperate rescue and tempered by shared trials, had indeed become unbreakable. It was a quiet, sturdy love, as dependable as the turning of the seasons, as vast as the Montana sky under which they lived. The years of peace had been a balm to their souls, a testament to the enduring truth that even from the harshest beginnings, beauty and love could flourish. The memories of that first desperate discovery under the mesquite tree were still there, but they were overlaid with so many layers of subsequent joy that the pain had softened, transformed into a poignant reminder of how far they had come. Elias, his hair now mostly silver, would often watch Lily from the porch, a gentle smile on his weathered face, and his heart would be full to bursting. She was his miracle, his legacy, the living embodiment of hope fulfilled. The seasons continued their timeless dance across the plains, and the legacy of Elias Thorne and his adopted daughter, Lily, became woven into the very fabric of the valley. Elias lived to a ripe old age, his final years filled with the peace of a life well lived and a love deeply cherished. He passed as he had lived, quietly and with dignity, under the roof of the home he had built, with Lily and her own family by his side. Lily, true to her spirit, had found a love worthy of her in a young doctor named Samuel, a man whose kindness and integrity mirrored her own. Together, they continued to build upon the foundations Elias had laid. The Bar M remained a beacon of hope and prosperity, its gates always open to those in need, its fields fertile, its herds thriving. Lily and Samuel raised their own children on the ranch, instilling in them the same values of compassion, resilience, and the profound importance of chosen family that Elias had taught Lily. The stories of her own childhood, of the brave rancher who had saved her and the cruel man she had faced down, became treasured family lore, told and retold around the crackling fire on long winter nights. And so, the generations turned. Lily's children had children, and their children had children, each new life a fresh branch on the strong and enduring family tree that had taken root with an act of selfless kindness. The ranch adapted with the changing times, but its core spirit, the spirit of Elias Thorne, remained untouched. The locket, passed down from mother to eldest daughter, became a sacred family heirloom, its tarnished silver a testament to a mother's desperate love and the remarkable journey it had unintentionally set in motion. The tiny, folded paper within, now brittle with age, was carefully preserved alongside it, a reminder of origins and the triumph of good over evil. Decades flowed into centuries, a vast river of time carrying the echoes of their story forward. The world outside the valley changed in ways Elias could never have imagined, yet the Bar M, now a sprawling estate managed by his descendants, retained its timeless quality, a sanctuary against the clamor of a rapidly evolving world. The legacy of Elias and Lily resonated not just within their direct bloodline, but throughout the community they had helped to build. Their tale became a local legend, a story of hope and redemption whispered from one generation to the next, inspiring countless acts of kindness. It was said that the echoes of their love, the love between a lonely rancher and an abandoned child, would resonate through that valley for 1,000 years, and 1,000 more after that, a testament to a bond forged not by blood, but by a love as vast and enduring as the land itself. And indeed, far into a future that would seem like a distant dream to Elias, when the world had spun on for what felt like millennia, a young woman, a Thorne many generations removed, stood on the porch of the old ranch house, now a lovingly preserved historic homestead. In her hand, she held a digital archive, a family history meticulously compiled. She paused at the story of Elias and Lily, her ancestor, the little girl found beneath a mesquite tree. A gentle breeze, the same wind that had once carried whispers of despair, now seemed to carry whispers of enduring love. The young woman smiled. The bond, she knew, was still unbreakable, its strength echoing through time, a timeless melody of hope, courage, and the enduring power of a family chosen by the heart. The legacy of what Elias Thorne did that fateful day, the simple act of choosing compassion over indifference, had indeed built something that transcended lifetimes, echoing for what truly felt like an eternity.